Gonsolin. I'm a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt under Half Gracie. One of the things I want to cover today is learning a systems-based Jiu-Jitsu. Uh, One of the things that's been happening recently is it's been gaining popularity, where if someone does this, you do this, they do this, you do that. One of the things that many people have noticed is that there's some difficulties with a system like that. One of which, if you look at some of the flow charts, is over 100 branches long in some of those cases. So it's very difficult to train something that's 100 different options over there, and certainly in a reasonable length of time where you're tight with your move set, you're confident you're able to deal with a very resilient opponent, and you're not freezing up and having issues with it. So the question is then, how do we effectively do it? Because when you deal with a teacher who's very good at teaching, it's not just about the person learning it, it's about the person learning in a very reduced time frame and very thoroughly under various conditions of duress. So one of the things we're going to cover, we're not covering how to develop a person's attention span or move sets and so on and so forth, but we're going to be dealing specifically with those systems. Now, this is assuming that you know what, say, an arm bar or a triangle is. There's really no point to learning a systems-based thing if all your attacks you don't actually know. So it's like you're routing to a triangle, but you don't know how to finish. You're doing an arm bar, but you don't know the breaking mechanics. Doesn't make sense. So obviously, if you're not at that level yet, you'd want to learn your basic moves before you apply a system that utilizes those basic moves. So anyway, moving on to a systems-based jiu-jitsu. Whenever you deal with it, I like to go into three to five branches max. What do I mean by that? So say if I have the back, I take them to the choking side. Now, if the person defends this way, maybe I trap their arm and then I look to get underneath their neck, grab their shoulder, and I execute a rear naked choke. Now, if I deal with the collar, maybe they block a certain way. I have to do whatever the case. So there's a if system here. If they do blank, then I do blank. If I do blank, then I do blank. So whenever you deal with that, if you go past five, in my opinion, if you go past like five different responses to train, you're going to have some major issues. It's going to be hard. It's going to be cloudy in your head to remember what to do because it's just so long. So try to limit it whenever you're drilling something. Try to limit it to three, maybe five reactions at first. Now, whenever you do it, it doesn't mean that you just right off the bat start with three or five different routes to go. No, you have to make sure that each one of those routes are actually very well done, refined. So the way I usually train is if there's a specific route, so the first one, I drill that on a generally non-resisting opponent, because if I'm fumbling it on a non-resisting opponent, obviously if my partner starts adding resistance, it's just going to be terrible. You're not going to be able to execute things. But anyway, so I'll do it on a non-resisting opponent. Once I'm very confident with the move mechanics, I don't have to think, oh, which one am I supposed to do now? If it's past that point, then I have my partner increase a little bit of resistance. Now, this is all dependent on you having a partner that's willing to give you resistance at the appropriate time when asked for. Once you add a little bit of resistance, you want to add some speed to it, because obviously no one's going to just sit there and let you do 20 different movements on them while you're in a live roll. It just doesn't make sense. So typically I have them, I speed up and I add more resistance. Once I'm pretty confident there, usually around 40 to 60% resistance, I can still execute the move. Then we go with the next response number 2. So I do the same method for that. Then I go to response number 3. Same method. And once I have 3 of those, and they're all obviously in the same grouping, then I have it randomized, where the person may have this reaction or that reaction, and I have to think about it and do the appropriate solution to their reaction. Now, once you do that, and this is going to be still not really a lot of resistance, very light resistance, then you're going to increase the resistance and the speed. Now, important note is if you start fumbling steps, you forget what order they're in, you get things out of place, just issues, and you're at a certain level of resistance, that means you have a little bit too much resistance. You haven't developed it very well yet, so you need to pace it back down. So the idea here is you want to always gradually go up. Now, one of the things that's very interesting whenever you deal with people learning, and this is from a ton of people I've taught, this is literally my job, when you deal with people learning, they always forget. Now, some people forget a lot more than others because a lot of people have stuff going on in their lives. They may have, kids, work that's very intense for their minds. So it's very distracting. Not everyone's going to be thinking about jujitsu or anything like that for the entire day. Some of us do, but most of us don't. So whenever you deal with taking your mind off it, there's always going to be a certain degree of loss when it comes to remembering what you had learned before. So after you develop this system and you've paced it up and stuff, and you're like, oh man, this is really good. I'm able to do it against a very highly resisting opponent and stuff. That's grand and everything. But what you need to anticipate is next time that you're able to drill the same process, you need to do the same process. But anticipate you won't be able to go right off the bat to 100% resistance. You're still going to pace up your training, but it'll probably be a lot faster than it was when you first started off. So essentially, that's what you really want to do when you do your training for systems. Whenever you deal with a system that's multiple facets, like 25 different groupings of stuff, then you have to divide it up with each one of those systems. It's like you're creating subsystems out of it. Once you create that and you get one chunk pretty on point, then you want to move to the next chunk, and then you still want to bounce back to the previous one. That way you don't get kind of like loose with your technique. You don't want to be foggy with it where it's just like, I can't remember, it was good like 2 weeks ago, but I can't quite remember this detail. You still want to maintenance your the different systems that you're adding to your jiu-jitsu. So that's my personal tip when you're training any systems-based jiu-jitsu. This also goes for system-based defenses where you're dealing with, they're trying to armbar me this way, let me defend this way. So whenever you do with any of the systems, you want to kind of train it that way. Now, another little side point, whenever you deal with a systems-based one, obviously, if something's very complicated and you don't have a very good memory, you want to start with something a lot lower. Now, there's different things that you can do to develop your memory, but generally speaking, you do not want to train a system-based jiu-jitsu if, one, your jiu-jitsu is not very developed in the slightest bit, like you don't know what an armbar is or what's a hip escape. But the other one is also if you have a very low ability to remember steps. Now, that can be affected in a number of ways. You may just not be very good with things in a row, or you could deal with the nature of the move. Maybe there's inversions or cross gripping that really makes it hard to remember steps because it's now opposite type of thing. So there's many things that can affect it. Now, going to backtrack into the systems, sometimes I'm asked whether or not I believe in people training both sides. Absolutely do. It's very useful. There's certain scenarios that it's required, like if someone's in a side control, you have to be able to defend both ways because people can go whichever way they want. That's very required. But one thing I do suggest if you're doing a systems-based or even really a complex move is try to get one side really good where you understand the intricacies of that move. That way you can use that to then troubleshoot your not so good side. Now, if it's a very simple move, like 2 or 3 steps at best, you can kind of just bounce on both sides and be ambidextrous with it. That's perfectly fine. But whenever you deal with more complicated stuff, you don't want to kind of like do both sides poorly. It's like jack of all trades, master of none. You want to be able to have something as a reference point that you can develop, and then you can use those nuances that you found out when doing it on one particular side to troubleshoot your other side. Hopefully that's helpful. Hope you guys enjoyed this video.